Hello everybody and welcome to a beginner's guide for Dwarf Fortress. This video is aimed at brand new players who've never touched the game before, but if you're returning, I'm sure you'll find something useful. If you're looking for a particular subject, I've attached timestamps for the contents of this video, and if you're brand new, don't worry, you're in the right place. Dwarf Fortress has been known to be one of the most complicated games ever made, and while it is true that the game has a large amount of depth, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's difficult to play, at least once you get the hang of the basics, which is the intended purpose of this video. In order to get started, we're going to start a new world by clicking on the Create a New World button, and immediately we are presented with a bunch of settings. Now you can leave these as the defaults, but I decided to make the world slightly smaller. If you're on an older computer or something without the fastest hard drive, this will increase the speed that the game loads and saves. The remainder of these settings are pretty straightforward. The age of the world, I do recommend you generate worlds that are at least 100 years old, just so that it has time to populate some interesting history. Next is the number of civilizations that can be interacted with. After that is the number of sites, which are points of interest on the map. These can be positive or negative to the player. The number of beasts, which are large threats that die off with time. Natural savagery, which is the general threat level of the areas that you can settle in. And of course, the frequency of minerals. If you're brand new to the game, I recommend you leave everything at default, but maybe make the world slightly smaller. But if you want a bit more of a challenge, I do recommend turning up savagery and lowering the amount of minerals. Now that we've examined our settings, let's dive into world generation. Now this might seem like a lot, but don't panic. What you're seeing is a brief overview of the history of the world up here in the top left. If you pause world generation, you might even be able to catch some of the events as they fly by. These can be read about extensively in Legends mode, if you want to dive deeper. Once world generation is complete, we can pan around and have a look at the areas that the game has created for us. And once we're happy, I'm going to click Play Now. Here we are presented with three options: Fortress mode, Adventure mode, and Legends mode. Fortress is what we're going to be covering in this tutorial, but the other two are important parts of Dwarf Fortress, which are worth exploring in their own right. But since this is a Fortress mode tutorial, we're going to click on Fortress. I mean, obviously, what else did you think we were going to click on? Once we've released our finger from the mouse button, we are presented with the overworld, and we're going to immediately close the tutorial. We won't be needing that. With that out of the way, I would like to direct your attention to the first important button. Down in the bottom right is a button that says Choose Origin Civilization. This is the faction that we will be playing as. As you can see, we have two separate options. Generally, I would recommend settling with whoever has the larger population. That faction will be highlighted in blue on the overworld. You then want to find an area that is close to your origin civilization, which, as I just mentioned, are the blue tiles. And while it doesn't matter too much where you settle, there are a few things that you should keep an eye on. The first are your neighbors. Who's close by, and how many of them are there, and does it explicitly state that they're hostile? The closer they are, and the more of them there are, and if they're hostile, the more likely that you're going to have conflict early on. The second thing that you should keep an eye out for is aquifers. I do recommend playing with a light aquifer, but try to avoid heavy aquifers. The third thing that you should keep an eye out for as a brand new player is the relative hostility of the area that you're settling in. As you can see up here, it says surroundings. For neutral biomes, which is what we're going to try and start in, there are three difficulty modifiers: Calm, Wilderness, and Untamed Wilds. Calm maps are pretty chill generally. Wilderness maps, you might have some larger animals, but they're not going to be directly hostile, most of the time. But if you decide to risk fate and play in the Untamed Wilds, then everything will be fine initially until you realize the entire forest is a ticking time bomb that wants to see you keel over and cry yourself to sleep as you bleed to death on the floor. I do not recommend it. Once we decide what general area we would like to settle in, we click on the map, and that zooms us in. This gives us a more detailed view of what we're looking at. There's several other buttons we can look at as well to figure out exactly what the place is going to look like. The first is Cliffs and Grade. The greener the color, the more shallow the slopes. The redder the color, the steeper the slopes. Same goes for relative elevation. The closer to blue, the further down and nearer to sea level it is. The yellower it is, the higher the altitude, eventually ending at gray, which is the highest possible altitude. These don't matter too much, and mostly just change the variety of the map that you're settling on. Lastly, you can change the size and shape of your map, but especially if you're on lower end hardware, I do recommend you leave these at default. Maybe even make it slightly smaller, like 3x3. Now that we've run over the basics, this little area here with the creek looks good. Let's give it a shot. Now it is going to give me a warning that there's going to be an aquifer, but that's okay. We can tolerate that. Now before we click the Play Now button, I would like to show you the difficulty settings. Over on the right, there are several different options, but the ones I would like you to focus on are enemies. you can turn them off in this screen with one simple click. This can also be adjusted once you are in-game in the difficulty settings screen. If you want to get more granular and click on the custom options, you can change a lot of different factors within Dwarf Fortress's difficulty. If something becomes a stumbling block that you find difficult, feel free to disable it in this menu, which once again can be accessed once the fort has been embarked upon, such as civilizations, were creatures, and megabeasts. And I'm sure that you'll discover them sooner rather than later. With that out of the way, we are now going to click Play Now. It's time to begin our Dwarven outpost, because Dwarven history begins here, at this place, Umstidthad Nail Theater. Strike the earth. I'm sure those jaguars won't be a problem. The first thing we need to walk through is moving the camera around. This can be accomplished one of a few ways. The first is with the mouse wheel. Simply scroll up or down the mouse wheel to move up and down Z levels. This can be a little bit disorienting at first, but just remember, it's like looking at a selection of flat Minecraft blocks from a vertical viewpoint. As you move up by scrolling the mouse wheel up, you can see down through the trees, and things fade off in the distance. And when you move down into the ground, things become kind of gray. If you're more of a keyboard person, you can hit E and C on the keyboards to move up and down. Of course, these can also be rebound in the options menu. If I hold down the middle mouse button, I can scroll the camera around, or I could use the keyboard to move the camera around with W, A, S, and D. Over here, this is a little ledge. If I move up and press R on the keyboard, it shows the ramps and the directions that they're going. These lower ramps are moving down to a lower Z level, and the arrows pointing up are leading up to another Z level. Dwarves can traverse these safely, and the player can even construct and remove them using digging tools. If you would like to get rid of the little arrows, you can press R on the keyboard once more. You can also disable the ramp icon by clicking on the little triangle button up in the top right. The next overlay that's helpful for discerning things on the map is the depth indicator. This can be enabled by hitting F on the keyboard, or alternatively clicking this little button. The depth indicator tells us how deep the water is. 7 is the maximum amount of water you can have in a place at any given time. Of course, it could span multiple Z levels of 7s, but in this case, it's just a puddle. 7 deep water is deep enough to drown a dwarf, and also deep enough for fish. If I would like to put away the tool that shows me how deep the water is, I simply press F on the keyboard, or click on the little pound symbol up in the top right. I think kids call that a hashtag. The next thing I would like to tell you is that you can zoom in and out by holding down Control and scrolling the mouse wheel. You could also do this by hitting the square brackets on your keyboard. Those are right next to the backspace button. And now you might think, well, the basic traversal is out of the way, but just in case you get lost, by default, pressing F1 will take you back to the wagon. See? Here I've done it twice, just to prove that it's not a fluke. If you would like to add additional location hotkeys or change your defaults, you could hit capital H on the keyboard or click this little button up here in the top right. With basic traversal out of the way, let's start unloading that wagon. And the way we're going to do that is by selecting the Stockpiles button. We can hit P on the keyboard or simply click on it. Once selected, it's going to prompt us to paint a small area on the map. And since I'm using this to unload the wagon, I'm going to make it a decent size. Once I've placed my stockpile, the game prompts me to accept it. If I want, I could edit it using the eraser tool down here, but I'm alright with the size and shape, so I'm going to click accept. Then it asks me what kind of stockpile I would like to create. You can be as specific and granular with these as you want, but I'm just going to select all, which fill out all of the default options for the stockpile. If you would like to customize them, you can click on the custom option. That will open up the stockpile details screen. Everything that's green has been selected for this stockpile, and everything that is red has been removed from it. For our starter stockpile, I'm going to remove stone and wood, because they're very bulky and take up a lot of space, and will fill up the stockpile. We're also going to have very large numbers of these items scattered around the map in a few moments, and they will fill up the stockpile, so that the more perishable items will be pushed aside. Putting items into stockpiles reduces the speed that they degrade, so this is important for things like cloth. However, there is one stockpile on the list that does the opposite. That is the refuse stockpile, and it's used for disposing of dead bodies and other garbage that you don't want in your fort, such as used clothing and rotting meals, and of course victims of the fortress cats. Once complete, the dwarves rapidly begin unloading the minecart, and we'll give them a moment to finish that. Looks like it didn't take too long, because they're already finished. Now let's take a moment to talk about job specialization for our dwarves. You can do that by hitting Y on the keyboard, or by clicking on the little hammer button down in the bottom left. The top 3 jobs, hunters, woodcutters, and miners, require specific uniforms. Because of this, the game does not allow you to blanket assign these 3 jobs to all of your dwarves. In order to chop wood, they require a battle axe. And in order to hunt, they require a crossbow, a quiver, and a selection of bolts. The most complicated of these tasks to keep up with is the hunter, because ammo management is a very real thing in Dwarf Fortress. So if you're just getting started with the game, I recommend minimizing hunters and focus on raising livestock if you would like any kind of meat in your fortress. Fishing is very time-consuming, but extremely productive. A very small number of dwarves can gather quite a large sum of food rather quickly. Plant gathering is also quite crucial and can be completed on the surface with the plant gathering tool. By default, all dwarves will complete this task. Most of the vegetation you see on the surface is edible, making farming in the early days of a fortress rather trivial. If you would like to customize labors, you can do so by clicking on the little gear icon in the top right. But I think that's out of scope for this particular video. Everything except for the top 3 labors are enabled for every single dwarf by default. And while it is good to be aware of this screen and how it works, be careful when messing with it, because often it'll cause issues with the dwarves' abilities to get jobs done in a timely manner if there isn't a large enough workforce for each and every job. Next, I would like to draw your attention to the kitchen menu. This shows what food sources you have access to at the moment, as well as what they are used for. Certain plants that can be cooked can also be used to create things like dye for coloring clothing. If you're brand new, I do recommend you cycle to the drinks screen and remove them from cooking. So if you decide to make some meals for your dwarves, you're not going to be cooking up your precious booze supply. Next, I recommend that you disable cooking of plump helmets, which are the most consistent and easiest food supply to turn into alcohol, and dwarves don't mind eating them raw. Brewing them into alcohol and eating them raw keeps the seeds, which can be replanted, while cooking them destroys the seeds. It's a pretty crucial difference. And while this might not be a problem if you have a very healthy food supply set up, if you're just getting started, this is a very handy setting to make sure that you have checked off right off the bat. If you find that you have a large supply of them in the future, then feel free to enable cooking. Next, we're going to tackle digging. We're going to start digging straight down into the dirt, so that we can find a place to begin building our fortress. To begin digging, I'm going to press M on the keyboard, or click on the pickaxe button down in the bottom. Once selected, we're going to see several different options. The first one allows us to dig horizontally into the layer that we are already on. The second is the one that we're going to need. It allows us to build stairs. I'm going to draw a little 2x2 square on the ground, and using the mouse wheel, I'm going to move the camera into the dirt several levels. We're going to go to layer -5, because that should get us a little bit of depth. Almost immediately, my dwarves grab their pickaxes and begin digging, and then they stop. This is because we've collided with an aquifer. If I move down underground and click on the mining tool once more, the layer below where they stopped has these little droplet icons. That means the dirt is moist. Now, because we settled on a light aquifer, it's not going to be too difficult to get through, but it is going to require some extra materials. But thankfully, those materials that we require are everywhere on the surface. We need some wood, or any other source of building material. I'm going to scroll back up to the surface and select the Chop Wood tool. Then I'm going to click and drag to select some trees to be chopped down. We need a stockpile to collect these logs. So I'm going to open up the stockpile screen once more and make a small stockpile at the bottom of the bigger generic one, and select wood. All of the currently jobless dwarves are going to go collect wood and begin making a little pile of it. These logs are what we're going to use to get through the aquifer. Once we've got a decent supply, I scroll back down to where our staircase ended, and selecting the bottom level, I'm going to draw our square once more, and I'm going to scroll one level down and into the aquifer. Now, it is possible to mess up the order that the dwarves dig these stairs out, and don't worry, I'll show you how to fix that later. Soon after, the dwarves have channeled out the stairs that I've requested, and if I select the mining tool, you can see that there's little droplets on the walls. I'm going to click the mining tool and ask the dwarves to dig out the walls around the stairs. Now is a good time to show you the mining priority button. I select the little yellow arrow on the right, and it gives me this pop-out screen. There's the admittedly not very useful blueprints tool. It can be used for pausing jobs, but since blueprints can't be copied or pasted or saved in any way, I don't find myself using them too much. The more important options are these priorities. Number 1 being the highest and number 7 being the lowest. I'm going to increase this to priority number 2. That will stop the dwarves from doing hauling jobs instead of mining. Whereas if it's number 4, it's a toss-up. Once the square of stairs are mined out and the walls have been removed, I click on the little pile of bricks, which is our build tool. Then I'm going to select the constructions sub-option. From there, I'm going to select walls, and it's going to ask me how I would like to build them. Select the material after placement, or keep using closest materials. We're going to select the material to use, and then click Keep Building After Placement. The game will remember this option in the future, and it's going to streamline the whole process. Once I have my 2 options ticked, I then select the 4 top tiles next to the stairs, and I'm free to use whatever materials that I have available. I'm going to use ash logs, because we have the most of them. Once I select all 4, the game confirms the job, and the dwarves are already working on it once I unpause the game. But it also keeps the menu open, so I can continue assigning new buildings. And I have a 3rd option, use last material. We're going to select that, and then designate the next 4 blocks at the bottom of the stairs. Once the dwarves are finished filling in all of those pieces, I'm going to assign the 4 remaining tiles. And with that, we have successfully penetrated the first layer of aquifer. Now we just need to repeat this process until we start colliding with levels that do not have the little droplets of water. The one thing that's worth keeping in mind is water sitting on the stairs themselves will appear as moisture, so you might want to wait for those to dry up. It'll take a couple of minutes. The good news is, once you start hitting layers that are made of stone, such as here, you don't need to use constructions to stop the aquifer. You can simply click on the smooth tool, which looks like a little brick here next to the eraser, and tell the dwarves to smooth the stone. That will also stop the flow. Be cautious when digging horizontally into aquifers, because you will also have to remove the ceiling levels. So if you're new to the game, once again, it is best to just get beneath the aquifers or simply build above them. I'm keeping this in this tutorial, even though this might feel a little bit advanced, because it is one of the crucial skills to learning how to play Dwarf Fortress. Once you've mastered this, you can complete anything. Now you see this? On this lowest level, the only walls that are said to have moisture in them are the ones that have water sitting on the floor next to them, meaning we've probably busted our way fully through the aquifer. So all that's left to do now is to wait for these floors to dry. So let's move back up to the surface and continue setting the fortress up for success. The first industry we're going to tackle is basic furniture. And for that, we're going to need 2 workshops. First, we're going to make a carpenter. This is important because certain items can only be made out of wood. It's also the most efficient method of food storage creation. And right next to it, I'm going to build a stoneworker's shop, which is going to be used for creating objects out of, well, you guessed it, stone. We have acquired several boulders while building that staircase. And with much enthusiasm, the dwarves quickly assemble the workshops. They can only do this if they have the job assigned, which by default is enabled on everybody. Once the 2 workshops are complete, I'm going to click on the carpenter's shop and click Add a New Task. And I'm going to ask the dwarves to make several beds here. Let's say 7, because that's how many dwarves we have right now. Once you see the little check mark appear, it means the dwarves have begun the task. And there he is, working on those beds. Since they seem occupied, I'm going to click on the stoneworker's shop and do the same thing. But I'm going to assign some doors. We're going to need to be able to lock things. Hatch covers are used to cover downward stairs as well, so perhaps those will be useful in the near future. But manually assigning all of these tasks is a little bit cumbersome, so why don't we show you something a little bit more fancy. If you go down to the bottom left of the screen, there's a crown icon. This is the nobles screen. Once we get rid of that pesky tutorial, the nobles screen is where you assign dwarves that have more middle management style jobs. And I would like to direct your attention to the manager. It doesn't really matter who we give the job to at this point, but later on, if the manager seems upset, you might want to swap this job to somebody else. I like to give it to the expedition leader. On the right, you'll see a red icon that says that they require an office. We'll cover that a little bit later, but the office is not required for the manager to function until you have 20 dwarves. And since right now we only have 7, we don't need to worry about that just yet. While I'm here, I'm also going to assign this dwarf as a record keeper. Once the office is assigned to the manager, we will get exact counts for the items in our stockpile and inventory. Someone needs to do the paperwork. And the reason I'm doing this is having a manager allows me to automate orders. And this gives us access to the work orders screen. Once you have this screen open, if you click on the little checkmark and clipboard up in the top right, you can search for any job to assign. And if you have the necessary workshop already constructed, the dwarves will automatically assign the jobs for you and keep reassigning them even if the materials aren't available until the amount that you've requested have been completed. This seriously minimizes the number of clicks necessary to construct objects. As an example, I'm going to assign 2 jobs to my stoneworker's shop, a rock table and rock throne. This will automatically default to 10 of each. Another way that you can assign work orders is in each individual workshop, if you don't want all of the jobs distributed to every workshop of that type in your fortress. If you click on the work orders screen on the workshop itself, and click on that familiar icon, you get the search function once more. And since it's specifically for this workshop, I'm just going to click on Make Bed. So let's lower that number down to 6, since they've already completed the first one I initially wanted. Now don't panic, it will take a moment for it to populate in the tasks list, because your manager has to go give the orders. But let's get back to digging, and go a little bit further down, just to make sure that we are below the bottom of the aquifer. Once the dwarves start digging into this lovely dolomite, you can see that the aquifer is no longer producing water at the edges. But I'm noticing something. Only one dwarf is actually mining, and I do have 2 pickaxes in this fortress. So I open up the units list by hitting U on the keyboard, or you can click on the little dwarf face down in the bottom left, and I click on the little dotted line shape of a dwarf. That cancels the job for that dwarf without getting rid of it entirely. So another dwarf who currently doesn't have anything to do can take the task. It works as I was hoping, and our lazy miner shows up to mine, instead of whatever they were doing. Next, I'm going to designate a few spaces that can be used for bedrooms. These little 2x2 rooms should be plenty. The bigger the room is, the happier the dwarf is with their room. The smaller the room is, the more they might get feisty. Obviously, this task is going to take a little while for them to complete, so let's take care of our livestock. I move the camera back up to the surface and check our livestock next to the residence screen. This is under Pets and Livestock. There's a few different icons here that are important, but one in specific that I would like to note. As you can see beneath the llama and the horses, they require pastures. Pastures means they need grass to consume, and cannot do this unless they are assigned correctly. In this same screen, you can also assign animals to be butchered, if you have a butcher shop. You can also remove their ability to make babies, if they have geldables, by clicking on that little knife icon, which requires a farmer's workshop. But enough of that, let's get our horses pastured. I'm gonna open up the zones icon, or press Z on the keyboard. It's right next to the Stockpiles button. Then I'm going to select Pen and Pasture, and make a good size spot. If you're wondering how big it'll be, just make it about this size initially. If you start to notice that all of the grass is gone in that square, it's definitely time to make it bigger. The Zones tool is quite powerful, and has many more uses, such as finishing those bedrooms that we've been working on behind the scenes. And while bedrooms don't need doors to function, dwarves really like a little bit of privacy. So I'm going to open up the build menu once again and click on Doors and Hatches, and select some of those doors that they've been working on as well, and get those placed in the doorways. Quickly, the dwarves come downstairs and begin placing those doorways in the soon-to-be bedrooms. In order for bedrooms to function correctly, at the very minimum, they require a bed. Dwarves also appreciate having a coffer or a chest and a cabinet. It lets them put their clothing and jewelry away. But since all we have right now is beds, they'll have to do. After placing all of the beds into the bedrooms, in the zone menu, click on Bedrooms. First, I'll show you the manual way. Make sure that we have the paint option selected, and then click and drag the bedroom. Once I'm happy with the size, I click Accept. And then if I want, I can manually assign a dwarf to the bedroom by clicking on the dwarf face and the dwarf of choice, or we can simply wait, and when a dwarf uses the bedroom, they'll make it their own, and won't let any other dwarves take it from them. Now I'll show you the easy way. If the bedrooms are set up with 4 walls, in this case a doorway counts as a wall, I can click on the multi option, and click and drag over all of the bedrooms. This tool automatically rejects completed bedrooms and accepts new bedrooms. The last thing I'll mention is if you're in a very big rush, you could just build a dormitory by placing a bunch of beds in one room without walls and dragging over top of it. Any dwarves will use these, but they'll get a little bit upset after a while. So that's why we build bedrooms. Now, since we're on this level, I think it's time we make ourselves an office for our manager. I'm going to dig out a little square here and make it a little bit larger so that it's a bit more roomy. I'm going to open up the zone screen once more and select the office option. Then I'm going to manually paint our office because the dwarves haven't brought a door down just yet. Because I haven't told the dwarves to bring a door down just yet. Once we have the office with the chair and the table in it, I click on the dwarf plus icon and assign our manager. And you're going to notice the stockpile numbers at the top of the screen become more exact. With this step done, we've begun the 3 Bs: beds, beer, and biscuits. These 3 things, and a supply of them, are necessary for dwarven survival. At least, if you want them to remain sane. So let's move on to the second B, and that is brewing for beer. But we need a supply of plants first. So let's talk about farming. Farming in Dwarf Fortress is really quite simple, and we're going to focus on farming plump helmets. We already removed these from cooking earlier in the video. Plump helmets are small purple mushrooms that grow very easily underground. Dwarves can consume them raw, cook them into meals, if we allow that, and dwarves brew them into beer. In order to grow them, we're going to need a farm plot placed on some dirt. So we're going to open up the Constructions submenu of the build screen, click on Farming, and select Farm Plot. And then I'm going to make a square that is 6 by 3. Now keep in mind this is quite large. Dwarven farming is quite efficient, and a farm plot of this size can likely feed up to about 50 dwarves, especially when combined with occasional harvesting of surface crops. I also like to make sure that my seeds are nice and close to where my dwarves are farming. So I make a little stockpile, go to Custom, click on Food, and then I click on Seeds. Now you can be very precise about what kind of seeds are going to go into this stockpile, but I'm just going to select all of them. And then go to that main stockpile up on the surface, click on it, and select the stockpile, hit the Custom button once more, go to the Food menu, and remove all of the seeds from this stockpile. That'll automatically transport them down into our new one. Then I'm going to click on our new stockpile and remove the barrels. This will remove any confusion of the location of the seeds in the stockpile. Dwarves aren't very good at finding lost items. Then I'm going to click on the farming plot and select plump helmets for spring, pigtails in the summer, and in the autumn and winter, additional plump helmets. Pigtails can be used for making cloth and are also brewed into beer, just like plump helmets, and dwarves like a little bit of variety. These are both things that you'll start with seeds for, so don't worry about running out. Now it's time to cover gathering surface crops while the dwarves begin planting our seeds. If you open up the zones screen, there is an option down in the bottom that says gather fruit. Go up to the ground level, assuming there are things growing, and click and drag a zone, and then go to the options and remove step ladders so that nobody gets stuck in a tree. With that completed, seasonally, in fall, and when crops are ready for harvest, dwarves will run into this area and gather whatever's growing. Next, we need to turn all of the stuff that we've been harvesting into food that is edible. I'm going to expand an area right next to my farm and start off by building a fishery, because one of my dwarves has been fishing this whole time. The fishery will convert unedible raw fish into prepared fish that are edible raw, which is confusing to say out loud. Prepared fish can also be cooked into meals. Thankfully, dwarves don't suffer from food poisoning. In the same farming menu is the still. This is used for brewing beverages. But as you can see, there's currently no empty food storage items. This is also going to be a problem because our food is going to fill up our stockpiles very quickly. The easiest way to make food storage items are barrels. These are created at the carpenter's shop. So I'm going to direct you back to the manager's screen, click on the familiar plus icon, and type in wooden barrel. And I'm going to ask them to make 20, but you will likely need many, many more than this. And once our expedition leader, who is the acting manager, is done updating the stockpile records, that wooden barrel gets assigned to the carpenter's shop. And just a few moments later, we have the option to brew drinks from plant, which is likely those plump helmets, or something from the surface. And once you see that check mark, the dwarves have begun the task. Since it functions, I'm going to open up the manager screen and type in brew drink from plant. Then I'm going to get a little bit fancy. We're going to click on this little green icon, and down at the bottom, click on amount of drinks less than 10. This will automatically restart the job if the amount of drinks is less than what we want. So I'm going to set that number to 50, and the dwarves will brew 50 drinks, 10 at a time, until they have more than that. But if I adjust it to 25, then they'll do 25 at a time, and reissue the order whenever there is less than 50 drinks. Now that we no longer need to worry about drink supply, we have completed the second of the 3 B's, beds and beer, and arguably biscuits as well, because there is a supply of fish to consume, as well as other random plants. As I was preparing to continue working on the fortress, I noticed a problem. You see, my stairs are busted. One of them is missing. It's not an up-down stair, it's just simply a down stair. If you notice a problem like this in one of your stair setups, here's how to fix it. Click on Constructions, and click on Stairs, and then click on the affected stair, and then scroll up 1 level and connect it to the stair above. The dwarves will bring down whatever material you assigned and fix your staircases. Lovely. Dwarves don't really like rough, battered up walls down in the underground, so I'm going to get them to smooth those bedrooms to make them a little bit nicer. And while those dwarves are keeping themselves busy, I am going to set up space for a tavern. and a dining room. Now all of this smoothing is taking up a lot of time. I want one of my miners to be a little bit more efficient at mining. So I click on Servesh here, who is one of my assigned miners, and I go to the labor option. And I click on this green button. This removes them from the general labor pool. They are now specifically a miner, and once they finish smoothing that wall, they begin completing the task that I want them to work on, which is digging my rooms out. It won't take long for the space to be opened up, and I bring some tables down, and give each of them a chair. Do not give tables more than one chair, or the dwarves will start arguing over elbow room. Once the tables and chairs have been brought down, I open up the zone screen, and assign them as a dining hall. Zones, such as the dining hall, can have associated tasks, and this zone is going to be designated as part of my tavern. I can do this by clicking on the little shield icon, and clicking on Inn and Tavern. Once done, I then can click on the magnifying glass, which shows me the tavern and all of the space associated with it. Up in the top is a very important option. This is whether or not you're willing to have visitors. Since we don't really have a functional fortress yet, I don't think we are equipped to have any visitors, because they will consume my alcohol supply, and that's very important for my survival. So I'm going to click on the little tent icon, which is citizens and long-term residents only. I'll make it public a little bit later once we have a bit of a population and maybe some guards. But the tavern is very far from complete. It needs a meeting zone. A meeting zone is where everybody who has no jobs prioritizes congregating. So I open up the zone tool once again and select meeting zone. Next, I have to associate it with the tavern by clicking on the little plus icon, and instead of selecting new tavern, I scroll down to the existing list and select the one that I've already created. This associates the meeting hall with the tavern, and they act as a single unit. As far as size goes, the bigger it is, the easier it is for the dwarves to sing and dance. So to provide the full benefit, I recommend you make this at least 6 by 6, with no large furniture to block dancing space. And no tavern is complete without mugs or cups, and these smaller objects are created at the crafts dwarf shop. I'll build one of these on the surface for now, but eventually I'll have to move all of this underground. And I'll do this manually because we don't need that many. I'm gonna click Add New Task, and then go to the Wood option, and type in Cup. We'll make 3 wooden cups per log. I select it, and the dwarves make us our cups, which they begin using to drink the alcohol. Back down in the tavern, I tell the dwarves to begin smoothing the floor, just to make it a little bit nicer. And because the cats are going to start killing rodents in my stockpiles, since we've got a growing food supply, things like this hamster need to be dealt with. So I'm gonna go over here, a little bit a ways away from the fortress, and make a refuse pile. But oddly enough, in order for it to fully function, we need to open up this familiar screen. Doesn't matter where we start, but we need to go to Standing Orders, and go to the Refuse options. Up at the top, it says Dwarves Ignore Outdoor Refuse. I'm going to enable that, so that we can get rid of those hamsters. Same with gathering outdoor vermin remains. Those cats are already leaving us many gifts. And would you look at how the time flies? Other dwarves have already heard of our great achievements, so they've decided to move in. And they've brought some more animals with them too. I can add those to my pen and pasture by clicking on the little bunny icon once more and adding it in with the rest of my animals. And it looks like the dwarves are just finishing smoothing up the basement, and we've already completed our first harvest of the season, and our food supplies are beginning to grow. Looks like the Fortress of Nail Theater is off to a good start, and will probably be very successful. Before I leave you here to continue on your own, I would like to point out that when you decide to finish a fortress, if you retire the fortress for the time being, and continue playing in the same world, the world will expand, and all of the dwarves from your fortress who are still alive will have the possibility to show up in your next fortress as visitors or citizens, if you play as part of the same faction. I highly recommend doing this. A fortress being finished isn't failure, it's not defeat, it's simply a reason to start again, and continuing to learn more about the world that you have begun to play in Dwarf Fortress. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you'd like more tutorials, you can find them on KitFox's YouTube channel, as well as my own. I'll link the playlists in the description of this video. The Dwarf Fortress Wiki is also an excellent resource alongside of the KitFox Discord and any other fan community connected to Dwarf Fortress. Good luck out there, dwarves. And remember, losing is fun.